I like how like so few people will have the general knowledge of WWE to understand half these jokes. Like we don't even use Ron Simmons as like you have to actually know who Ron Simmons is. He's Farouk, by the way, and he it's not like I don't know. Okay, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, welcome everyone to Page and Screen. This is a book club for books adapted to movies and a movie club for movies adapted from books. My name is Calvin De Silva, and it took me too long to get through this book because I had to stop and have cry sessions every once in a while.
Hi, I'm Ashton Snapborn, and If Beale Street Could Talk is the alternate reality story of The Mandalorian.
This is Doug Winnipeg, and I can't wait for the sequel. Is this a series?
Hi, I'm Jesse Mully, and you should read this book.
This episode, we are talking about If Beale Street Could Talk. If Beale Street Could Talk, the novel was written by James Baldwin in 1974. If Beale Street Could Talk, the movie was directed by Barry Jenkins in 2018. Let's get into the novel. It's a story told from the perspective of Clementine, who is a young black girl in, I think, Harlem. In the Harlem. In New York, right? So she's recently pregnant with her, I guess, fiance's child, who is Alonzo Hunt, nicknamed Fawny. Clementine's nickname is Tish. So Tish is recently impregnated by Fawny, but Fawny has also been recently charged with a crime that he did not commit. He's been charged with raping a young girl, a crime that he didn't commit, and is now spending time in prison. The novel follows a non-linear format. It jumps between Tish and Fawny's past, dating back to when they were children and how they met, to them kind of growing up in New York City, I guess falling in love over their coming of age. And it also takes place in, I guess, what is the more present time, which is Tish trying to navigate Fawny's imprisonment and trying to get him out of prison by talking to lawyers and trying to track down witnesses in his case to prove his innocence. Okay, let's get into it. What did everyone think of this book?
It doesn't feel like you're reading a fiction. This is like reading somebody's like testimony and like life experiences. You know what I mean? That's like a disheartening thing too, because you read this and then to like remember, like you can't really even call it a fiction, because I can say with certainty these experiences have happened before. So drawing from history and what we know, it's like, oh man, this actually happened. It's kind of hard to get through that. But this book was filled, and I'm going to be really cheesy here, but it was filled with like really good human moments. And I think one of my favorite parts is when they're at the Spanish restaurant. And that's just like for me, a little oasis in this harsh desert of reality that this novel gave me, because you can see that Tish and Fawny really do love each other, and that the whole precipice of this novel is based off these two people cannot be separated, and yet they are, and it's just having to navigate with that. So
I really enjoyed the book. Like from the very beginning, I found it entirely engrossing. At no point did I ever feel like the story lagged or anything. It was a really I was very captivated by the story. It's a tough read, obviously, for obvious reasons. It's kind of a slap in the face of the reality of racial injustice in America and the way it has been for way, way, way too long. But it's a good book, and I think it's a book that everyone should read. I strongly recommend it.
Yeah, it was good. I quite enjoyed it. You know what? Actually, this was my favorite book. Well, maybe not favorite. It was the best book I think we've read. I really like Anne of Green Gables. That might be my favorite book, but this is like right up there. Like everything you guys said was 100% true. It's a tough book to read. You know the craziest thing about this book? It was written in 1972, but it honestly feels like it was written like 2 months ago. Like that's
Yeah.
that's
Mhm.
the saddest part of this book. That these
Nothing's changed.
Yeah, nothing's changed. Like it's one of those things where it, like, if had I looked at it, had it said written in 2020, I'd said, oh, just somebody's trying to make a point about modern day uh, with uh, with Black people for America, right?
Mhm.
That's what I would think if it was written like this year or last year. But that's not the case. This was written in 1972. And so I actually, as I was reading it, I kept thinking, man, this must have been written fairly recently. And I'm thinking, no, that's not true. I don't think it was. But I refrained from actually looking at the date of its publication until I finished the book. And then when I looked it up, it was 1972. I'm like, damn, like this is like, so it's terrible, the fact that this book makes more sense today than it may than back then, because I think a lot of people back then would have read this book and thought that so much of it was, like, maybe not false. Like, people would have said, oh, racism isn't that bad, or the cops aren't that bad. Like I imagine that if you grew up in a mostly white environment, even if you considered yourself woke, if to use a current term, even if you considered yourself woke and an ally to Black people, you may have still read this book and considered a lot of it pushed into the realm of pure fiction. But the sad part is not only does this book make more sense today than it did all those years ago, but so much of this uncovering of what really happens on the streets, of how the justice system treats Black Americans, all that stuff is coming to light now, and it feels like this book is so topical that it could have been written this year, and it was written in 1972. Yeah, there's just something about that kind of pisses me off just a little bit. So I think that's at the end of this book. I basically slammed it down. I'm like, damn it, like that need for justice in everybody. At some point, it just like ticks you. I'm just like, you're like, damn you, like why does the American system have to be this bad, right? Like, I don't know. We're not American, but it's not. There are lots of problems with the Canadian justice system as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I realized now I should have looked into what the response to it was kind of in the 70s versus now. James Baldwin has kind of become like a really prolific author, and his theme is one that, like, obviously, like, especially this year has come up on a lot of lists of books to be read and stuff like that. So I did try to read as much of his stuff as possible. And yeah, like I said, like I had a hard time getting through this. Like I was like consistently kind of like, yeah, like getting upset or getting sad or like just outright crying while I was reading it. Something I wanted to touch on though is and this I guess kind of goes in hand with what Jessica was saying about like how human the novel felt and those like little moments of humanity. Because I've been reading a lot of James Baldwin, I kind of got this sense of what his voice is. There's a book that he wrote called Notes of a Native Son that is kind of, I guess, a memoir of his life, but it's basically a series of essays that he wrote over the course of his career. One of the things he touches on is the protest novel in America. A number of novels written by either white people or Black people or people of different colors that talk about the Black condition and basically brings this stuff to light. He had like a very real criticism of those novels, and I highlighted it to talk about it. One of the novels he specifically talks about is Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was a novel that was supposed to talk about the condition of Black people in America, but he kind of criticized it because it just kind of frames slavery and racial injustice as this tragedy, and it's a horrible tragedy, but that's really all it says about this stuff. And there's so many protest novels that do that. That's what he's saying, is like when all you're doing with your novel is just framing this tragedy, you're ignoring the humanity, you're ignoring the human people that this affected. And so one of the lines that he writes is this is from Notes of a Native Son, but one thing he says is, the failure of the protest novel lies in its rejection of life, the human being, the denial of his beauty, dread, power, in its insistence that it is his categorization alone which is real and which cannot be transcended. This idea that, oh, like, you're in this terrible situation, that sucks. And he kind of wrote that all of these protest novels were just convincing Black people that this is the situation and there's nothing you could really, like, it kind of sucks. Beale Street is so the opposite of that. I mean, at its heart, it's about trying to fight this injustice, but it's those human moments that really make this stand out. Like you talk about the Spanish restaurant, and that's beautiful. But one of my favorite moments too is it's a moment when, pretty early in the novel, after Tish tells her mother that she's pregnant.
Oh yeah.
But it's that moment where they're all just kind of waiting for dinner to be ready. Her mother puts on like some music, and then they start cooking, and it's just this moment where they're just waiting for food to be ready, and they're just listening to the music and sitting, in their own spaces. And she says something about how like people have been doing this for generations, this like beautiful ritual of like waiting for food to be put on the table so that you can gather. I think one of the specific terms that he uses is the blurred human voices from the street. Out of this rage and a steady, somehow triumphant sorrow, my baby was slowly being formed. Like that specific line, triumphant sorrow, I just found that like so moving, because it's like, it's more than just a novel about how terrible racial injustice in the United States is. It's about how these people, find the beauty in their life, and it's about this this triumphant sense of sorrow. You feel horrible about what's happening to them, but at the same time you feel this burgeoning need for them to fight back. And anyways,
There's
I thought.
There's a quote in here that I actually really do love, and it's around the beginning of the novel. It's when Tish is talking to herself, and it's just, trouble is being alone. And that quote alone nails so many different things, because in the context, like the whole justice system is not going to help you out here. To know that you're lost and you have no one else to rely on, that's what real trouble is. And it's like a human feeling. A good thing about this book, when it's either a monologue or it's a conversation, I found that it was easy for my brain to read this book. The way James Baldwin wrote it, it feels like directly translated from one person's brain into another. And I've rarely have that benefit with books. I have to go back and reread lines quite a lot, whereas this, I sat down and just read it in 2 days, and it was no problem whatsoever. It was so easy for my brain to fully understand and grasp what's going on. All the scenes are flawless, and this is something I would actually like if you're in school and you have to do a book report for like maybe grade 7 onward, like this is a really good book to use.
There's some pretty heavy like content for a for a 12-year-old kid in this.
Well, yeah, that's.
I just imagine a 12-year-old kid reading, just like, let me read you next for excerpt.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember some explicit sexual content.
I know there. I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about how my brain was able to.
No, but that brings up a point that when Ashton suggested Beale Street, the only thing I had ever heard about this was a friend of ours, or Janelle. She explained to me one day about Black Love, and she talked about this book specifically. And I was only half listening. I didn't pick up a lot. I don't remember the conversation very well. I'm not saying that to be a dick. It just happened a long time ago. It was just a throwaway conversation, really. But the one takeaway from that conversation was it was about Black Love. Well, and in my brain, I thought Black Love means like it's a really erotic novel. And so in a way, I kind of walked into this knowing that it was a sad novel, but it was also about Black love. And then so as I was reading it, like my preconceived notions kind of changed a lot. Like when there was that explicit sex scenes, like it didn't shock me because I knew that was coming. I knew that was likely going to be a part of the story. But the shocking part was, and I think this is what makes this book so good, it wasn't just about erotic, sexual, man-woman romance. This book talks about like this love between sisters, love between you know what I mean? Like there's this whole community, and a part of the main story is a Black family who love each other, right? At no point do you ever think to yourself, these guys don't love each other. And then so many times in the novel, one of the characters is falling. One of the characters is losing faith, and then another character jumps in and says, "Hey, you don't lose faith. This isn't Like this is how we survive, right? And then like it shows like the sex itself, like the erotic part of this novel was wholly based on love. It wasn't just erotic for the sake of eroticism, right? And then on top of that, like there's Ernestine and Tish had like beautiful sister scenes where they were like talking and laughing, and they were like encouraging each other, and even like when Fonnie shows up to talk to the family and says we're going to get married, right? And it started throughout all the book, and they kind of, in a way, they kind of give the reader a breather. We're seeing parts of like the Black experience that we would never be privy to unless we were able to read it in a book. With all of those things combined, with the entire scale of love this book shows off. And in that sense, I understood that it's about Black love. It's about Black love in like the truest sense. And I loved that book because of it. Ashton?
Yeah, like I said, like I think to me, what this book really stood out to me, like the major theme of this book was hope, trying to find hope in the most hopeless situation imaginable. Watching these characters, struggle. Some of them struggle to stay optimistic through this horrible situation, and then having another character kind of try to talk them off the ledge, even though this does seems hopeless. It was really touching to read that kind of a story for a change. I would have never have thought to pick up this book, unfortunately, ever, and I'm glad I ended up picking it, because it like I said, I think it's, in my opinion, I think it is the best book that we've read on this podcast. It was incredibly touching and meaningful and relevant to today's issues. So I'm incredibly happy that we put this on the list. At the end of the day, I'm very happy with this book, and it spoke to me on a very personal level.
To talk about another pretty key aspect of the book, there was a pretty heavy theme, I think, on religion that kind of permeates the book. I was interested to see what people thought about that aspect of it.
Mrs. Hunt's pretentious, holier than thou attitude.
Like she is framed as dickish. I can't think of a better word. But in a way, you could frame it in two ways. You can make it as fair and as unfair. And the thing is for me personally, I do have a real problem with like seeing how religions react with other people. And so I came to it as this seems like a fair representation of what would actually happen. But somebody who is evangelical, Baptist, or whatever, they may say, oh, they're misrepresenting her, right? And so I can't really speak for the other side. Like, it's one of those things where I always see hypocrisy when I see things like there's a key scene where they invite him to the Rivers house. The Rivers family invites them to the Rivers house. And they're talking, they're having a good time, they're trying to be good hosts, but these people they show up with something on their like a chip on their shoulder, right? And at some point, not to bore you with the entire details, actually it's a really amazing scene, you should read it. But at some point, Mrs.
Hunt.
Oh yeah, sorry, Mrs. Hunt. At some point, she curses the child in her womb, and I'm like, I found that a fair representation, because I constantly see people say things like, oh, we need to protect life. Life is the most important thing. Life is godly and stuff. But then every chance they get, they seemingly trample on life itself. And I feel like that would have been a fair representation. And it's a smaller part of the book, like that is a theme. It's not an overriding theme, but I do feel that it's a fair representation for me personally. You know, if anybody else has a completely different point of view, I'd love to hear it. So
I completely agree with Doug's thoughts on it. I felt that Mrs. Hunt felt like a very sadly realistic character. I don't personally know anybody like Mrs. Hunt, but I've met very self-righteous people that I wouldn't put past them to say something as terrible as that. The stuff that she said, and at no point did I never came off the page like, oh, that's a pretty critical, scathing opinion of religion or whatever. In my opinion, I thought it felt like something that actually certain people are self-righteous like that, and they would think they're in the right one by saying that, but they absolutely are. Like, it's a reprehensible comment that they would have made.
Reading into James Baldwin's career a little bit, he wrote an essay called "The Fire Next Time" that I guess like summarizes his views on religion, because he's had like a very like, I guess, like intense relationship with it, because he grew up fairly religious. His father was a minister, and then when he matured and went off to like college and got educated, he kind of fell away from that. He was still very firmly entrenched with it. Again, like I say, like he has this first person perspective of what happened in the 60s. So he also saw the like rise of the Nation of Islam in Harlem at the time. He like met with Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and got a first person perspective of what the Nation of Islam stood for in the 60s. In both of those cases, like both in like his Christian childhood and like Islam in the 60s, like he saw the dogma behind all of it. He kind of like picked out the self-righteousness of a lot of it, and I think like he frames it extremely well in this novel, because I think that's why it comes off as realistic, is because he's talking about something that he's lived through. He kind of also looked at his father in a similar light. He had a very difficult relationship with his father for the same reason, because his father had a very self-righteous approach to religion and how he preached religion. I don't necessarily think Mrs. Hunt is a one-to-one representation of his father or any one particular person, but I think this is definitely like a character that he has experienced in real life, and there's some really beautiful and moving imagery in the way that he conveys this stuff, because the very first, like one of the very early scenes is when Tish and Fonny are children and how they're getting to know each other, as Fonny takes Tish to his church, and Tish witnesses these people in this like frenzy, this like religious fervor, and it was in that moment where she looks at Fonny and they realized that it was something like, the people that love us are not here, or like the people that matter to us are not in this place. It's this beautiful kind of summation of how like this is the like self-righteous dogmatic aspect of religion that she rejects at an early age.
Like it's also, I kept thinking this must have been written fairly recently. So the book's written in 1972. It's at the end of like MLK died 2 years earlier. The New York crack epidemic is like just starting at this point, right? And then on top of that, the AIDS epidemic is a decade later, right? It's just this really terrible feeling where I felt that the person writing this book would have had to have that historical knowledge of crack is coming and AIDS and the mass incarceration, the war against drugs. You'd have to have all of those historical contexts to make this novel. But the saddest part about this novel is it's before all of those things happened. It was almost like it was like prophesying, here's the problems we're facing today, because all of those things, like the crack epidemic happened, it basically killed or imprisoned an entire generation of young Black people. And then because of needles, because of heroin, because of the drugs, because of all of that stuff, AIDS really took a toll on those communities as well. Reagan came in and he passed all of these war against drugs. Biden, your guys' hero, he came in, he passed he campaigned on like Violence and Criminality Act. I don't remember exactly what it's called. And all of those things led to mass incarceration that was so close to what happened to Fonny that it was like silly. And then on top of that, more recently after Rodney King, where people finally had access to cameras, and then beyond today where we all have cameras in our pockets, we're starting to see exactly how police officers interact with Black Americans, right? And it's almost like it blows my mind that this book was written before all of this. It was like it was prophesying, hey guys, let's pay attention to these issues today because tomorrow they will be bigger than ever. And I don't know. Anyways, that's what I wanted to say. Another thing I really liked about this novel was the fact that at no point, like I can't remember her first name, like when she
Victoria,
Victoria, when she got raped, at no point did the women or any of the people in the justice system say, let's try to say that she wasn't raped. I love those scenes where they just believed her. She said, oh, I know what a woman knows, and I know you're raped, but Fonny didn't do it, right? And I just, as I said, this book started with like moments of horrid interaction with humans, and then like beautiful moments between people. And I don't know. I'm sorry.
To go back to what you said about how it does feel like it's ahead of its time, like that's another reason why it is. You think about like the Me Too movement didn't come about till like 2 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever, and and all of a sudden we're now thinking in those terms. We're thinking in these terms of like, oh yeah, like we need to start believing women. This was 35 40 years ago that this story already kind of took that perspective, and I think that's also ahead of its time. Another thing I think is also the way that they represent masculinity in this book is severely ahead of its time. Like think specifically like Fonny's relationship with Tish, I think is so beautiful and truly, like you said, based in love, but also his relationship with his father and his relationship with his friend Daniel Carty. Both of those like male relationships and love between two men, that's something that you don't see very often in books, especially from a male author, like especially considering that James Baldwin is a male author. Like you don't see this like genuine like representation of love between two men. That is another thing that I think was like really ahead of its time.
The one thing I really liked about the Daniel relationship is when he's talking about being in prison, he's talking about the horrors. But the thing is we so much tend to dehumanize criminals. Like I was just watching a documentary on the Yorkshire murder, and they had the only reason they didn't catch the guy is because they didn't care about prostitutes. That's essentially what it boiled down to. And I feel like we do the same thing with criminals. But there's this whole scene where like Daniel's talking about getting raped in prison and stuff like that. And so often in movies and stuff, it becomes the butt of the joke, like rape in prison is funny or something. But they always framed it as it truly is, as just being like horrid. And they're talking about how Daniel was never ever gonna like forget what happened to him in prison and stuff. And they simply don't, especially when it comes to Black people. I can't think of really any white examples either. Maybe they're just males in general, but they never frame that in such a way that allows males to have that agency of like, I'm hurt. This hurts me, and it will continue to hurt me, and it's horrid, and there was no jokes involved, right? Like it's a really this is why I say that this is the best book we've read. So
okay, our time for the book is running up. Does anyone want to add anything else?
Did you learn a lot about Black love, Ashton?
Sure did.
If anybody has any Black love questions, you know who to come to.
Yes.
I think like already kind of covered a lot, but if you don't consider yourself woke, or if you're looking at like a list of like books that you need to read to be woke or whatever, like because there was a lot of those going around this year, like this is probably the best place to start. Like I read a lot of those books. I read a lot of nonfiction books about racial injustice in the United States, and I read a lot of fiction as well. But like I think out of all of them, like this one stood out like head and shoulders, and it was written 40 years ago. So if you're looking at where to start and where to educate yourself, then I think this is definitely a good place to start.
Yeah.
To get into the movie, it came out in 2018, was directed by Barry Jenkins, follows the story of the book very closely. There are maybe a few scenes that are left out, primarily in Tish and Fonny's childhood isn't touched on in the movie as much, and the ending is slightly different. The movie has the more, I guess, hopeful ending, or like, and a slightly easier to swallow ending. In the book, Fonny's father kills himself at the very end because he kind of, I guess, loses hope in the fact that his son is. Yeah, he loses his job, and I guess like kind of loses hope in the fact that his son's ever gonna be free. So yeah, he winds up killing himself, and they find out about it like in the last page of the book. And it's in the last page of the book that Tish goes into labor, and it's really kind of a disturbing scene because it's her going into labor and realizing that Fonny's gonna miss this. And I think going back into this like dream of what his freedom would look like. Yeah, it was a tough ending for the book. In the movie, we see Tish give birth, and then her child grow up into adolescence, and then her and her child visiting Fonnie in prison. It's kind of this beautiful moment of this family, surviving despite the situation that they're in. I absolutely love the movie. I loved it when I first watched it. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at. The cinematography is phenomenal, and the same with like the music. I feel like I didn't appreciate this the first time I watched it. Watching it again, the music is absolutely so beautiful. Performances are obviously like stellar. Regina King, who plays Tisha's mom, is so good in this movie, and there's just such a visceral reaction to watching her. Yeah, I tremendously enjoyed the movie. What does everyone else have to say?
Yeah, I think it's a really good adaptation. Like you said, it's pretty accurate, other than like the ending and the fact that they like kind of cut out a lot of the childhood bits. Like the way he adapted it is pretty much exactly how I envisioned it reading the book. Not a single one of these characters were miscast, or like it was pretty much exactly how I imagined every single one of them. If you were to ask me which one I prefer, the book or the movie, it actually would be a really hard call for me. They both get the same point across as effectively as the other, I think. So I really did enjoy the movie quite a bit.
This book and the movie are so close together. Even like the scenes that like the way they build the scenes chronologically mirrors the book. It's almost like they had the book open, and as the scenes progressed, they simply wrote new scene and they added. Like that's how close the two are. The only major difference is the ending, and I don't know how much we want to get into the ending right this second. I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I just wanted to talk about the cast to connect it with what Ashton said. Once I knew I was reading this, I tried to stay away from anything about the novels. The sad thing is the book kind of showed me the two actors that I knew would be there. Everybody else, I didn't know. I didn't know that Regina King was involved. And so I didn't know who was going to play the mothers. I didn't know who was going to play the Officer Bell. I didn't know who was going to play anybody, right? When you're reading those books and they cast somebody and you're like, oh damn, like I hate that casting, right? But at no point did I say like this doesn't match who I have in my head, but he's just as good. And that's what I found I was doing a lot. I have a cast list here up. Like it has Diego Luna from Dirty Dancing 2 Havana Nights. Like if you may be in other stuff. Pedro Pascal, Dave Franco, like it's like this strange like
the Dave Franco one was like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah,
like,
actually,
like,
he kind of threw me out a little bit because it was just like, hey, it's Dave Franco with a mustache. But
yeah,
Regina King was she's the only person who I knew the name of, but everybody, most of the other older Black actors I'd seen in other stuff, I just didn't know their names, right? I thought that they did an excellent job. The acting was like above and beyond. Like it just all around the movie was excellent. But I disagree. I would disagree with Ashton, as I like the book a lot better. And yeah.
Jesse,
with again, I like the movie. In the book though, Sharon's part where she goes to Puerto Rico into the club, it was described a bit more better in the book. And that's kind of a part that I actually do enjoy because it's simply Sharon taking up this mantle of going into the unknown in this completely ridiculous scenario to try and absolve her son-in-law's guilt. But when we get to that, it's kind of short in the movie, but it still had the same impact, especially when she touches Mrs. Rogers and she's reliving that moment again. And you can just see there's just so much anxiety. There's more anxiety in this movie, I think, because you're getting to see these human emotions play out. It's not just written on paper. But there's that part. Another part that's incredibly hard is where Daniel is talking with Fonnie. And it's long and it's slow and it's quiet, and it needed to be that way because he's suffering from PTSD from what he's gone through. You just gain such a feeling for poor Daniel here because you're the way he his facial expressions are in it and the way he's talking, he might as well have been through that, right? Like the actor that played him conveyed that horror so well. So you're feeling uncomfortable watching this. And yeah, like Kelvin said, cinematography was great. There's little tiny moments like anytime that they're looking at each other, there's just a little bit of happiness. They brighten up the shot is brightened up more. There's color on screen. You can see the life in their face again, so you feel happy watching it. So Yeah, I would say though, I do like the book a little bit more just because some scenes are more greatly described, but the movie is just a spot on how an adaptation from book to movie should be done.
Yeah, to kind of agree with you guys, I think the book probably is a little bit better for me just because of that description and because of how lyrical the prose is, and it's extremely moving to like read through a lot of that description, and it's hard to translate that into a movie, but that goes back to the work of, I think, the cinematographer, and to kind of convey so much in those scenes where there is no dialogue. And yeah, it's those scenes that are absolutely stellar and that just really stand out is the scenes where nothing's being said, like when they first get the loft and they go down into the streets and they start celebrating. Absolutely gorgeous shot, like I've seen, I think, a lot of movies shot in New York, and I've never seen a movie shot in New York that looks like that. It's like they got this like little pocket of the city that you hadn't seen before, and you hadn't seen in this light before. I think another aspect of the movie that I really liked, this happened a few times where they were like kind of character looking straight at the lens, and I don't know what the shot would be called, but like
down the barrel.
Yeah, kind of. And so a lot of those shots, and they're so powerful. And meaningful. Because like Barry Jenkins just kind of lets us sit with it, like he doesn't cut away with it. He let his actors kind of emote in that moment, and those scenes range in emotions. You feel the love between Fonnie and Tish, but you also feel that sense of desperation between them when they're looking at each other through the glass in prison. But he also does it for characters like Belle, and you feel that like that uncomfortable feeling when you're looking at him. That's one of the like really powerful things that Barry Jenkins does, not just in this, but like also in Moonlight. He really lets us sit with quiet moments in his movies. He makes them meaningful by just like taking it slow and letting his audience feel everything that's going on. And so that's another aspect I think the movie did very well, is it handled the scenes with no dialogue very well.
Now I can't wait for the WWE casting. That's it.
Oh God.
Yeah.
That is...
Going back as a quick aside to Doug saying, "Oh, Diego Luna from Dirty Dancing Havana Nights." I'm surprised that's the one you went to be honest with you. Like, seeing that Diego Luna more recently was in Rogue One and played Cassian. And that was definitely my first thought. Between him and obviously Pedro Pascal, who played Mando, or
I think that was his intention. Is Diego Luna the lead in Dirty Dancing too? No, right?
Yeah, he is.
Is he actually?
I promise you, he's the lead. All right, I
gotta watch this movie.
Look, Ashton may be the Black Love expert here, but but I'm the Dirty Dancing 2 Havana Nights expert in this group. All right.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm just trolling at this point. But so I didn't want to refrain from talking about it, but I actually had the complete opposite view of. I thought that book ending was more hopeful than I liked the book ending more than the from the movie ending, because so the book ending, and I'm trying to remember now that I'm thinking about it. It's like it ends on like a poem or something where it's like cry. He's like, right, and then
there's a baby crying so loud it means to wake the dead.
But so it's a really ambiguous ending, and I think that's why I like it. It doesn't say Fonnie got out. It doesn't say Fonnie got this. It basically says we don't know what happened, but life goes on. That's what I took from it. But the movie itself is like, it's like a hard, like, he asked for parole and now he's in jail for
Or he took a plea bargain.
Or plea bargain,
which makes it even more. It makes you feel even more hopeless for him, and for a situation where it's like, yeah, they did everything they could, and it still wasn't enough, and he still had to serve like a plea sentence regardless. In a sense, you're right, it does feel even more hopeless.
Like, and the thing about an ambiguous ending though is it could have been a lot worse, but it also could have been a lot better. So that's why I like the book ending. It was a lot more ambiguous, and I felt because of its ambiguity, I felt it was a lot more hopeful. That being said, like it's not like I was pissed off at either of the endings. I quite enjoyed it. And in fact, as I was watching the movie, because I literally finished the book, and I'm like, well, I might as well watch the movie right now. Started watching the movie, and I kept thinking to myself in the back of my head, how are they going to like end it? Are they going to end it on a poem or something? But no, they ended it like they did, where he sees his growing son, and both were beautiful in a way. But I just liked the book ending a lot more. I thought it was more hopeful, and so yeah.
Yeah, I guess the ending in the book can be interpreted that way. Just from what I got from it, just a loud ending like that with this baby crying and it's heading toward to see Fawny. I just got like such a loud ringing in my ears when I was reading that ending.
Well, and I guess the father does die in the book, right? Frank.
Yeah, Frank.
Frank dies, so that's the sad part. But like at the same time, like they're kind of building to he could get parole. Like it really shows like this tactic of like the American justice system. And you know what the sad thing is anybody who knows me knows that I'm a big fan of true crime. I'm a big Forensic Files fan. Like I've watched all of those episodes. And I know personally of, not personally, maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't know them personally, but I do know of examples of people who were charged with rape in the 70s. And these are all black men, by the way, who were charged with rape in the 70s, served 40-year sentences, but were released in the mid 90s or early 2000s because of the advent of DNA, right? And I think another reason why I thought the ending of the movie was so sad was because that only happened to men who decided to test the system and say, maybe I can beat this rap. They lose, they spend 25 years in prison, and then DNA exonerates them all of these years later, right? But they don't keep those rape kits if someone goes with a plea deal. Like as soon as they say, I did it, aggravated assault and rape, okay, here's 25 years. They get rid of all the evidence. They don't need it anymore. The person said that they're guilty. Knowing that, like having that knowledge in the back of my head, I kind of thought, I was like, oh, damn it. Like there's no way that they'll ever be able to say you're exonerated. You never raped Victoria Rogers, right? That's what I took. And so that's a larger explanation as to why I think like I had this visceral reaction of once he said, oh, I took a plea deal. I'm like, damn you, don't take a plea deal. Like, don't you know that in like 25 years, DNA will exonerate you from this?
Yeah. Okay.
So good times. WWE casting.
Does anyone else have anything to add about the movie though before we move on? Obviously, I absolutely love the movie. And if anyone has not seen Moonlight, Barry Jenkins' other movie, I highly recommend you go watch it because he's kind of a phenomenal filmmaker. Like
He really is.
Okay, let's move on to our our recurring segment where we try to find a WWE cast for this book. By the way, if I saw and if Beale Street Could Talk, produced by WWE Studios, I am not watching that movie. Like, there's no amount of money that would convince me to watch that movie.
I'm the opposite. If I saw that, I'd be like, well, I guess I have no choice here. Like, I have to check this out. Well, John Cena's Officer Bell. Like, I think he could.
Yep.
I'm trying to think. Like, the closest to be would be like Big Boss Man.
You're literally just picking a cop character to play a cop.
Yeah, like that's it.
Also, the Big Boss Man is dead, but
yeah,
they can Luke Skywalker him into it.
Good Lord.
Yeah,
a digitally recreated Big Boss Man.
Oh God.
No, okay. The worst part of this is, and this is a sad to say, there are a limited WWE black performers. And so, like, basically, you'd have to like scrape the bottom of the barrel of all the black cast members to even like fill this.
Get some Ron Simmons in there for Frank.
I was gonna say Ron Simmons as one of the dads.
You know the craziest part of that though is Ron Simmons would probably light it up as like one of the two dads, like Frank or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. No, he would kill it.
Yeah, he's like his son.
Yeah,
your son's
he drops
in jail.
a catchphrase. It's awful. Just cast the entire New Day. Like I don't even know in what roles, but they're just peppered in throughout.
Well, Biggie is obviously Daniel. So
This
that's
was Hunt and
Yeah, Biggie would be a good Daniel, actually.
That would make me so sad to see Biggie in that.
he'd light it. You know, the craziest thing is, I think Big E probably, like, not joking, has the acting chops to actually pull off an awesome Daniel character. You just watch it, you'd be like, damn, Biggie's lighting it up over there. Like,
Who are we cast as our leads, guys?
well, Titus is in there somewhere. Then it just feels like racist. Like, I feel like I'm gonna get canceled if I start naming names. Like, that's
Also, I think the other thing too is the characters are so young. How many young Black WWE stars are there?
I think Xavier Woods would be a decent for Fonny.
yeah. You're right. You're
that's
right.
true.
But the like how many Black women are in?
Knowing WWE, they'd probably find a way to whitewash one of the roles.
Yeah,
Somehow.
that's what I was thinking.
Like
They just cast Mandy Rose as Tish for some reason.
Yeah. Oh God.
like how many Black women are even in WWE? Like
Naomi
and Sasha Banks and Medusa.
Bianca
what
Belair.
about Ember Moon?
Bianca Belair. Yeah.
Bianca. Yeah. So I guess you could fill the cast. I don't know how good the cast would be, but you could fill it. Like, actually, you know, Sasha Banks did a pretty good job on The Mandalorian. Like, I don't know how well she could.
How well
carry.
that translates into this extremely emotional script. But yeah, she could probably do it. We'll just throw in a fight scene for no reason.
Yeah.
Here's a hand flamethrower. Who'd you cast as the lawyer Hayworth?
You know, actually, I could see John Cena doing that role.
I'd pick Dozovic.
Oh
Well-
yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, just yeah.
he's like talking.
It's like what?
It's just like, hey, it's like, are you gonna help get Fonny out? He's like, he's just like, what the hell? No, okay. But that's the thing we never touched on, was the casting for Hayworth. Like, in the book, they describe him as mid-30s, chubby with balding hair, and in the movie, he's like super hot guy from whatever movie. I can't think of it.
Super young looking guy that just like fresh out of college. Like he looked like he is like 24 or something like that.
I think that actually does make sense though. Like, I can't fully recall the description of Haywood in the book. But like in the movie, it just makes sense because he would be really young, you know, like, and he is like kind of untested, you know, and that's why he's willing to take on this case. Obviously, in the 70s, not a lot of people were taking on these cases or defending these men. It does kind of make sense, I think, for him to be kind of young. All right, that pretty much wraps up our thoughts on If Beale Street Could Talk. For our next episode, I have chosen The Ghost in the Shell. Yeah, very excited for that. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Page and Screen. Special thanks, as always, to me and my friend for creating all the music you hear on this show. Check out more of their music by visiting meandmyfriend.bandcamp.com. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like us, leave us a review and a rating. That would really help us out. If you'd like, you can connect with us on social media. We are at Page and Screen 1 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also search Page and Screen on YouTube, where you can watch a video version of this show. We post regular updates of all the books we read and all the movies we watch, and we would love to hear your thoughts on all of them. We're not the only ones who can offer our unwarranted opinions, so chime in and join the conversation. And finally, we're still trying to get the word out about this show. We want to keep making it, and the more people that know about it and listen to it, the more it helps us out. So if you know a book nerd or a film geek in your life, please pass it on. We would love to reach them, and I'm sure they'd love to hear from us. Hey, maybe you know someone who's been advocating for the New Day to be taken seriously as legitimate actors. Until the next Page and Screen, thank you for listening.